in the Department of English and Theater. And we'd like to thank Kentucky Humanities for making this possible. They make it possible for us to get in just absolutely wonderful speakers into our little county so that we can hear some great information and learn a bunch of new cool stuff. All right, let me get this going and let me get out of the way and welcome Dr. Smith.
Hey. Hi, well, thank you very much. I'm happy to be here, everybody. Again, my name is Mason Smith, and I'm going to be talking about The Truth Is Out There, UFOs and Cryptids in Kentucky. My talk tonight is going to be along, let me get my little clicker to work. I'll do it this way. Well, maybe I won't. Hang on one second. Okay, there we go. Here's what I'm trying to do today. I'm going to do a brief historical overview. What were people thinking about and worried about? You know, where were their minds when all this began? I've got 3 UFO events that are, these are not just average UFO sightings. These are nationally known UFO encounters. The Mantel Incident, the Kelly Hopkinsville Incident, the Stanford Incident. And then I have 3 cryptid cases. I've got a Wolfman case, a Bigfoot case, and what's the other one? Anyway, there are three cases of weird creatures from the Black Lagoon. The Goatman. How could I forget Goatman from Louisville? You probably know the Goatman. Now, at the end of the talk, I've got 3 nutty professor theories. So I want to talk about Goatman, and I want to talk about Bigfoot sightings, and I want to talk about UFOs. And I'll tell you right here at the start of the talk that these are, I'm the nutty professor. These are nutty professor theories. So just because I think this does not mean that you need to think this. So you don't have to believe it. You don't have to agree with me. And in fact, if you disagree with me, I'm okay with that. And I understand. I'm not going to get mad or anything. But I do want you to think about these theories. I think there's something interesting going on here. I think it requires somebody to really look at it carefully. And a lot of times the easy answers, whether you're a radical skeptic or a radical true believer, kind of miss some of the complexity of the problem. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Please bear with me. I promise you the brief historical overview will be brief, but I want to set it up because that's going to come back later about things that we talk about. Went the wrong way. Here, let's go this way. This is a picture of my father during World War II. And he's wearing the soft uniform cap. So we believe he's in England, and he was stationed in England before the Normandy invasion. So this would be in early 1944. And he is somewhere along a country road. And one of the stories he told was that, of course, before the Normandy invasion, nobody knew the date or the time. It was the most top secret thing ever because they didn't want the Nazis to know when the Allies were going to come ashore or where they were coming ashore. So he was stationed originally at Bath, and then they were moved him from the Midlands down to Kent near Dover. So he was billeted in this big house, and one night, in fact, the night of June the 5th, 1944, after midnight, he's awakened by the rumble of heavy bombers going overhead and out over the English Channel. Well, it was wartime, it was middle of World War II, that wasn't unusual. But then there was another wave of heavy bombers, and then some fighters. And he got up and kind of put on some clothes and went outside. It was a summer night, June of 1944, and looked up in the sky, and there was wave after wave after wave of bombers. B-17s, American B-17s and B-24s, heavy bombers, British Lancaster bombers and Blenheim bombers, big lumbering 4-engine massive bombers, British Spitfire and Mosquito fighter patrol craft, American P-38s and P-51s, all of them heading out over the channel, one wave after the other. He said it never stopped. It went on all night. And he went back in and, went to bed. He's okay, this is it. This is the invasion. They're going ashore. And his unit went ashore at D+30. So in early July, he was finally moved ashore with the invading forces. Now, the reason I mention that is that this is one of the first times in history when it wasn't just an aircraft in the air or a handful of aircraft or a few dozen aircraft or even a few hundred aircraft. During the war, there were thousands of aircraft flying in tight formation in a limited geographical area. The British routinely ran 1,000 bomber raids. I mean, the scale of this just boggles my mind. So here's this is an artist reconstruction. This is an American B-24. And you can see up here some of the red circles. Allied flyers, British and American flyers over occupied Europe, started reporting these, what we would call a UFO, unidentified flying objects. They were balls of light. Usually white or yellow for the British at night, and the Americans flying in the day would see these big red balls. And they would follow the aircraft. They would seem to dodge out of the way. If one of the gunners tried to track it with the guns, they would seem to move, in relation to what the airplane was doing. Completely freaked out the pilots and the flyers who were on board. They reported it when they got back to Bomber Command in England after the raid, and they're scratching their heads. They're, okay, I don't know what's going on. Are they shooting at you? And the flyer said, no, they didn't interfere with us at all, but they're just right on our tail. What's going on? And they said, well, if they're not shooting at you, don't shoot at them. Just go ahead and do your mission and come back. So beginning in World War II, there are all kinds of things being seen in the air. Now, when the war ended, American and British, I guess they're intelligence officers, but they're talking to German Luftwaffe officers, people who were flying in the German Air Force. And, in a quiet moment between interrogation sessions, they said, hey, what were those balls of light that you guys were flying during the war? We couldn't figure out what they were. What was going on? And the Germans look them up and down going, what do you mean, what were we flying? What were you flying during the war? They were seeing German flyers were reporting balls of light at night and red balls during the day, and they thought it was something the Allies. And they come to the same conclusion. They weren't interfering with the German planes. Leave them alone, one enemy at a time. So World War II, 1939 to 1945, these are called Foo Fighters. Let's move forward in time a little bit. This is a picture of John F. Kennedy. You probably recognize him. And this man is Wernher von Braun. And Wernher von Braun was a rocket scientist, and you may have seen a Walt Disney production starring Wernher von Braun, We Will Go to the Moon. And he was a rocket scientist at the Redstone Arsenal in Huntsville, Alabama. And he designed the Saturn V rocket that took Neil Armstrong to the moon. He designed the Saturn I orbital vehicle that took the early Apollo, just the orbital Apollos to the moon, into orbit. The Titan II and the Redstone rocket and the Atlas lift vehicles, all of the early NASA lift vehicles were designed by Wernher von Braun and his scientists at the Redstone Arsenal. And here's another picture of von Braun, again with Kennedy. And they're at Cape Canaveral, and this is a mock-up of the one of the Saturn lift vehicles that von Braun had developed. And I'm going to show you another picture of von Braun. And this was with a previous employer before he came to work for NASA and the Redstone Arsenal. Here's good old Werner with his previous employers, a bunch of smiling Nazis who were having a lot of fun murdering half of Europe. He designed the V-1 and the V-2 for Hitler. And in addition to the smiling picture of John F. Kennedy, there are pictures of Wernher von Braun showing off his V-2 rocket to a smiling Hitler. So this guy was not a good guy. He was one of the bad guys. At the end of World War II, the Allies collected as many of, now they got rid of these guys, but as many of these scientists as they could get their hands on and brought them to the United States, brought them to England. The Russians grabbed as many as they could from the Eastern Zone, took them back to wherever they went in Russia, and the idea was, we want these guys, A, away from Germany, and B, if you're going to build rockets, we want to build them for us. So here's what I want to sum up in the historical thing. It's a wartime mentality. They lived through the Great Depression. a horrible, horrible world conflict. Millions died. It's all about secrecy. Loose lips sink ships. Don't talk. Don't give anything away. We're behind. They did discover, both the British and the Americans, and later the Soviets, the Russians, that the Germans were way ahead of the Allies in aeronautics. They had jet aircraft flying in combat at the end of the war. They had the rocketry that the Americans didn't have. And clear until the end of the war, Hitler is in his bunker in Berlin. The Russians are coming in from the east. The Americans and the British are coming in from the west. They're only a few miles from Berlin. And Hitler is telling his guys in the bunker, don't worry, our scientists they're working on a wonder weapon. Ein Wunderwaffe. And we're going to win the war. Actually, we've already basically won the war. As soon as this thing becomes operational, we're going to kick these guys out of Germany and we'll dominate the world. We're only a few weeks away from operationalizing a world domination weapon, a Wunderwaffe. He was mistaken, of course. The Allies got there first. They did not, whatever this was. And general thought is that he meant the jet aircraft, or he meant another rocket, or he meant something like that. But we don't know. All of those scientists were either swept up in Operation Paperclip, which is what brought Wernher von Braun to the United States, or the Russian or British equivalent of that. I think the British teams were called T units for technology. And they were Army, Navy units, but they were professor types that had been drafted, and their idea was get into these labs, get all the notebooks, get all the paperwork, and grab as many scientists as they can, put them on a boat and get them back to England. Well, that's what Operation Paperclip was, but it was the Americans trying to grab rocket scientists. Danger from the skies. For the first time ever, Americans and Brits and Canadians and people really began to think we're in peril. When the war broke out in 1939, the United Kingdom had about, I'm going to kind of make this number up, but it's pretty accurate, 25 battleships or battle cruisers. The Americans had about 10. The French had about 3 or 4. The Germans had the Bismarck and the Tirpitz, so they had 2. The Italians had 2 or 3. And so here's Britain, 25 major capital ships. They're on an island. Nobody can touch us. The Royal Navy commands the seas. We are safe. The Americans have oceans between European enemies and Asian enemies. We're perfectly safe. We don't have as many battleships as the Brits, but we've got 10 heavy guns battleships that can pretty well keep anybody off of our shores. Nobody can touch us. And of course, when Pearl Harbor came around, we discovered that of the 10 battleships, 7 of them were on the bottom of Pearl Harbor, and that they absolutely could touch us, and air power, and they had aircraft carriers, and we're in a heap of trouble. So people are aware of that, and they're looking at the skies. When I was a little boy in the 50s, we had the Civilian Observation Corps, and people would go to the top of the grade school in Central City, Kentucky, and look with their high-powered binoculars for Russian bombers that might be coming in. Now, why the Russians would waste a perfectly good atomic bomb on Central City when a good sneeze would probably have blown most of it down, I don't know. But anyway, we're patriotic folks down there, and we're going to look for those Russians, and we're looking to the skies. Okay, so here's the war's over. It's June of 1947. This is Kenneth Arnold. He's a businessman. He's a private pilot, and he's flying around Mount Rainier from one business appointment to the other, and he's in the Civilian Aviation Corps, and there'd been a plane lost. So he's off his route. He's over there kind of looking for evidence of this downed airplane. And on or about June the 24th, 1947, he sees, I don't know if you can see this little boomerang-shaped thing, but he sees 9 of these things flying between the mountains. And he was trying to estimate, he counted how long it took him to go from this mountain to that mountain. And then he did a quick calculation, and it was just some, 2,000 miles an hour, some blinding speed that no human craft could do. And he said they kind of shimmered as they went along. He said, as if you took a plate and kind of spun it. Today we'd say a frisbee, but this is 1947, they didn't have frisbees. if you just, flung a plate and the reporter interviewing him coined the term like a flying saucer. So Kenneth Arnold did not himself come up with flying saucer, but that is what he said he saw. Well, this story goes coast to coast. Everybody is talking about flying saucers. And shortly after that, the Roswell incident occurred in Roswell, New Mexico. Something crashed on Mac Brazel's sheep ranch. Well, what was it? The Army goes out to look about it. The next day, the U.S. Army Air Corps issues a press release. We've recovered the remains of a flying disc. That's on U.S. Army Air Corps station. And of course, that goes worldwide. People are calling from London and Paris and all over the world. What, you've got a flying saucer? Well, what's going on? And General Roger Ramey in Dallas hears this on the radio, picks up the phone and calls Roswell, and apparently just blisters the line. What are you guys doing out there? And so this is all cleaned up, and they issue another press release. Oh, it was a weather balloon. Sorry, we mistook a flying saucer for a weather balloon. It was a weather balloon. That's what it was. So, I mean, it's in the atmosphere. People are thinking about it, they're talking about it. And so at that point, I want to talk about our first Kentucky case. This is the Mantel incident on January the 7th, 1948. Now, here's Thomas Mantel. He's a combat veteran, thousands of air hours. He flew a P-51 Mustang, and he flew in the Normandy invasion. He could have been flying in one of those planes that flew over my father's billet in Dover before the Normandy invasion. He was flying air cover for the Normandy invasion. He was a brilliant pilot, lived through the war. By 1947, he's mustered out of the Army, and he is the Army Air Corps, but he's working for the Kentucky Air National Guard. He's a flyer, he loves to fly, he's got all this military training. And in that early January day, he's been sent to Chattanooga to pick up with some of his friends. I think they're flying 4 P-51s from Chattanooga back to Fort Knox. So they're going to Fort Knox, not too far from here. So he's flying along, and this is what a P-51, later called an F-51, when the Army Air Corps became the U.S. Air Force. And see, it's got the Kentucky and then National Guard. So this is, I guess that's his tail number, I'm not real sure, but this is an artist reconstruction. Air traffic controllers at Stanford Field and Godman Field at Fort Knox, and Stanford Field at Louisville, we're seeing something, that big triangular thing coming over the Ohio River, somewhere between here and Louisville. So this thing passed over, if not Trimble County itself, certainly people at Trimble County could have seen this thing go over. And it was huge and shiny and moving pretty slowly, more slowly than an airplane would. And so Godman Tower contacts Mantel and his team, because they're in the air and coming in from the south, to go out and what's going on, go see about that. So he goes over, and some of the air traffic people said it looked kind of like an ice cream cone, but real shiny. The 3 other flyers were running out of gas. So they said, well, look, we're going to land and refuel. If you can keep an eye on it, we'll relieve you and we'll take over the chase. Just keep an eye on it while we go and refuel. So Thomas Mantel said, that's fine. He was flying, the airplane was not armed. It was civilian time at wartime. He's at peacetime, it's not wartime. He's flying in 1947, 1948. He does not have oxygen. So it's not an armed plane. He's not got an oxygen mask. The last transmission from Mantel to the tower at Godman Field, and it's controversial because different people have different versions of this, but his the way it's recorded in most versions is Mantel says, I'm closing rapidly on the target. It's huge. It's metallic. I think I can get a little closer to it. If I can climb a little closer, I want to see if it has any insignia. And that's the last transmission from Mantel. He was chasing it south across Kentucky, roughly the way I-65 goes from Louisville through Bowling Green and ultimately into Tennessee. And his plane then was in a tight spiral. It had stalled out, was in a spiral stall, and he crashed at Franklin, Kentucky, south of Bowling Green as you're going into Tennessee. And there's a highway marker there to designate where he died. Now, you can't really see this. This is part of the propeller, and that's the engine area. This is part of the cowling there, and some of the wing and material. So he kind of bellied in. He was, of course, killed on impact. And what happened to him is really still kind of a mystery. He was chasing a UFO, and the standard explanation was that he got above his height, his oxygen level, and he passed out, and the plane went into a stall and he crashed. And that is the most reasonable thing to put forward. Now, what makes it kind of mysterious is that during the war, pilots, first of all, he was a real experienced pilot and knew very well what the symptoms, you don't just black out. You have tunnel vision, you've got severe headache, you begin to get dizzy and disoriented. And pilots are trained when they have any of those symptoms, put the nose down, fly into thicker air, and you're above your ceiling. You can't go there without oxygen. So he must have known that. He did know that. He'd flown high altitude missions with bombers where he absolutely had to have oxygen. They trained him over and over and over. During the war, when people ran out of oxygen on a long mission, occasionally the pilot would black out. His hand would fall off the control rudder, at which point the plane, if it was climbing, once his hand is off of the thing, it immediately goes to neutral. So the plane then goes to level flight. And because he's had the engine up front, the nose is just automatically depressed. The plane flies itself into heavier air. The pilot wakes up and goes, man, what a headache. Whoa, I better, and flies himself home. For whatever reason, this did not happen with Thomas Mantel. He apparently did not wake up. There was no attempt on the cowling to release the latches. They had quick release latches, and then it would slam back because of the air pressure already. If you need to bail out of one of those things, pilots love the P-51 because you could get out of them. B-29s was a big metal coffin. You couldn't get out of the B-29. If that gets shot, you're going down with the plane. It's hard to open the hatches, and they opened against the wind flow, and it was just bad design. But a P-51, when you throw the latches, it slams back, and you're pretty well sucked out of the airplane, once you let your seatbelt go. If he had done anything, he could have gotten out of that airplane. He was not under attack. There were no bullet holes in the airplane. He made no attempt to release his cowling and parachute out. This is Project Skyhook. On that day, the Navy Department was doing high altitude research, and it was classified. Not only classified from the civilians, they didn't bother to tell the Army what was going on. They released this balloon at Wright-Patterson, what was in Wright Field in Dayton, and it got caught up in some winds and carried across across southern Ohio, into southern Indiana, and ultimately from Indiana into Kentucky, and ultimately, presumably down into Tennessee or Alabama someplace. But as this thing went higher and higher in the sky, the ball of gas up in the top would expand, and this thing would be huge, reflective, and probably look like a giant ice cream cone. So sadly, what Thomas Mantel may well have been chasing was a Project Skyhook because they wouldn't tell anybody. Loose lips sink ships. This is classified. For the first time, we're flying in high altitudes. They had no idea. They didn't even know about the jet stream until after the war. They didn't know what the pressures were. They didn't know what the temperatures were. They were sending these balloons up because, it was a relatively modest instrument package, but they had to find out because now we're going to be flying up there. We need to know. Okay, now this is my favorite one. This is the Kelly Hopkinsville incident. I love the Kelly Hopkinsville incident. Now, weirdly, this happened in Hopkinsville. Well, it happened in Kelly. Kelly's an incorporated community about 10 miles north of Hopkinsville, like you're going up toward Madisonville. So it's right on the Christian County, Hopkins County line, North Christian County, where you're going in south of Madisonville. And in August of 1955, I was a 10-month-old baby at Central City. I was within 15 miles of this thing. Now it's just 10 months old and still in my crib, with a bottle. So I had no idea what was going on, but I feel a real kinship to this. These are little creatures, that's a human, and this is how they're described. And what's happening is his family, the Sutton family, had some couple of friends over, and like a mother-in-law and a couple, and they had 2 or 3 children, and then another couple. So there are about 6 adults and 3 or 4 children in the house. They're outside, even of Kelly. So even Kelly's a really small place, and they're out in the country. And it's 1955. They've got, the screens in the windows, but they don't have air conditioning. It's really hot. Sorry about that. So they're at one point in the evening, one of the men has to go out to the well. They don't have running water. They needed more water. And he's out on the porch and he sees, well, I've seen one of them flying saucers. Yes, sir, I saw a flying saucer. So he goes back in and tells everybody that he's seen a flying saucer. Well, this is, people are talking about it. A man died chasing a flying saucer. It's in the news, it's in the paper all the time. Well, they're making fun of him and they're, didn't see that. We need water. We're trying to make supper here. Go get a bucket of water. So he and a friend go out and they get this, and they see something like that. Long arms, sharp ears, and they come running in and they're telling everybody, and they're making fun of them, but not as much. And so people go to the windows and they go out, and so suddenly there's quite a few of these things. And they're climbing up on the roof and they're on the porch. There's, it's a small country house. And, these are Kentuckians. Well, you know how Kentuckians operate. What do you think they did? They started shooting at them. Those little green guys are killed my farm. So the family had a fair amount of ordnance there just around the house. 2 or 3 shotguns and 22s, a couple of pistols, and a deer rifle, among other things. So they're shooting at these things, and they said they just kind of did a backflip and then kind of ran around. They didn't like fall over and, oh, he got me. And so this gunfire goes on for some little time. Some of the people in the house, the women and children, were seeing these things pop up in the windows. And the women, they have guns too, because they're, country women. I think they had a pistol, so they're blasting away at the windows. Well, these are not rich people. They had money, they had enough food on the table, and they were getting by, but they didn't have money laying around in buckets that they could shoot up their house. They're shooting up their porch, and they're shooting through the roof and shot out some windows and screens. But they believe that they're under attack. And so after some little time and quite a few bullets and shells being expended, they're running out of bullets. Don't you just hate it when that happens? You're under attack by an alien horde and you don't have enough bullets. That's just the most bothersome thing ever. So they were just really irritated, and they grabbed the kids and they ran out, and there's a truck and a car and maybe 2 cars. So they put the kids and the dog and they pile in this and peel out of there, and they drive down to Hopkinsville and they get the police. So the police come back and the state police are there, and some military police from Fort Campbell, just down the road. Now remember that little bit. I'm going to come back in a minute to the military. Why would the military police be right here? But that's among the investigating officers, sheriff's deputies, city police officers, state police, MPs from Fort Campbell. They found nothing. Now, the standard skeptical response is, well, they were owls. They just mistook owls. Well, first of all, these are country people, and they know an owl when they see one. And secondly, they're Kentuckians. So Kentuckians don't shoot at things, they shoot things. If they'd been a bunch of owls, there'd be a bunch of dead owls around on the ground, or at least a bunch of feathers. And there's no. Now, one of the teams did report over in the area beyond this far field where the UFO landed. They saw a bunch of depressed grass and stuff, so there was some evidence. But in terms of these little green bluey guys, they didn't find any bodies or any blood or anything like that. What happened in Kelly Hopkinsville in 1955? The only honest answer is we don't know. The skeptics say they were drinking, which the sheriff specifically said that these are church-going people, they were not drinking. That was not going on. They were drinking water, they weren't drinking beer or anything else. They were sober, they were terrified, but they were sober. They weren't, that wasn't the cause. But that's where we are. The skeptics said that they were having a party, they were tired, or under the influence of something and they mistook owls for an alien invasion because it's in the pop culture. It's everywhere. It's in the newspapers, there are movies, all this kind of stuff. Here's a Hopkinsville New Era story of spaceship, 12 little men probed today. This is a close-up of that. All kinds of investigations going on today in connection with the bizarre story of how a spaceship carrying 12 to 15 little men landed in the Kelly community early last night and battled occupants of a farmhouse. So gunfire erupted, although no one seems to have been hurt, at least that we know of. And there's some of the people, I know the reproduction's not good on that. So, a reproduction of a reproduction. Okay, here's another of my favorite ones. This is a Stanford incident, 1976. Now, once again, I was really close to this. I was a senior at Center College in Danville, just a few miles from Stanford, where this happened. And I was working for the student newspaper and was studying media and was really involved in news reporting at the time. And I don't remember anything about this. I wrote my co-editor when I was doing research on this. I said, do you remember anything about the Stanford incident just down the road from us? Because apparently it was reported in the Herald Leader, the Lexington TV reported it, and somehow she didn't know anything about it either. So I felt a little bit better. But here's what happened in Stanford. Louise Smith, Elaine Thomas, and Mona Stafford, it was Mona's birthday, and they lived in Liberty, and they were going to go from Liberty driving a 1968 Chevrolet Nova. And they're going to drive up to Lancaster, which is between Danville and Richmond, to go. There was a nice family restaurant, and it was her birthday. They're going to take her out and have birthday, and they had a cake. They ordered dessert. It was going to be a celebration with some friends. And before we even get there, these were not drinking. They weren't out there partying. You know, skeptics said, well, they were out there whooping it up. Well, these women never whooped it up ever in their whole lives. So they're not a whoop it up kind of outfit. They were going to go to a family restaurant, have a nice meal with a friend, and then go home because they had to work the next day. So they leave there at 10 or 10:30, 11, whenever the place closed. They had about a 30-minute drive to get from Lancaster back down to Liberty. And they're going down Kentucky 740, 743 or something like that. It's a Kentucky highway. A UFO starts to follow them. And they become concerned. They can see this thing in the rearview mirror. It's coming right on top of them. And then Louise is driving. And then she reports that she's lost control of the car. The car won't stop. She can't control it. And that suddenly the car is like going 90 miles an hour. Well, that's science fiction right there, because a Chevrolet Nova wouldn't go 90 miles an hour if you're driving down a mountain with a hurricane with a tailwind. You know, I remember Novas, it's just physically impossible. Their Nova was going 90 miles an hour down Kentucky 762 and out of control. Well, they report that at some point, and they're not sure where it was along the road, but they make an impossible turn, almost a 90-degree turn, and go up some dirt road or gravel road. And they're all thinking, okay, we're gone. We're dead. This is it. This is the end. We're going to hit a tree. We're going to run off and hit a bank, or we're going to roll over, and we're all lost. The next thing they know, it's like 1 a.m, and they're pulling into the driveway. And the car is operating normally. They're all, you know, everybody's okay. And it's now 1 o'clock in the morning. They should have gotten home at 11. You know, there's some missing time. But what happened? This is a scene from a play called High Strangeness by Elizabeth Orndorff, Pioneer Playhouse put on a couple of years ago, based on that incident. And Marie and I, my wife Marie and I, watched this play. And if I'm remembering correctly, Elizabeth Orndorff, the author, was in the audience that night. I don't think it was a premiere, but it was one of the performances. And the play opens in their home, and they have just come in from that incident. And they walk through the door, and they're, as you can see, what just happened? What's going on? And so the play has to do with them trying to deal with this. And as happened in real life, they call, one of them had a nephew who was close to them and was in the Navy, and they thought he would know what to do, and they called the sheriff. And the way it plays out, both in the play and in real life, is that the sheriff found nothing along the highway. Skeptics said they had highway hypnosis. They had basically become hypnotized, kind of spaced out as they were driving home. They were tired and late at night, and they'd had a good meal, and it was a fantasy. So their friends and relatives, they spent the rest of their lives, 2 of them passed away. Mona is still alive, and that's who Elizabeth Orndorff interviewed to do the play. But the other 2 women, the 2 older women, have since passed away. They were ridiculed by their friends and family. That you were, just making it up, or you're trying to get attention. Of course, that was not the situation. The play, I thought, was really well done. They were traumatized. They were having an experience, and it was an unpleasant experience. They were terrified. And when they get home, the family and friends think it's funny. Okay, those are my 3 UFOs. Let's do a couple of cryptids, or 3 cryptids. This is a Poplar Creek in Jefferson County. It's not far from here. If you're going into Jefferson County on I-64, as soon as you cross into I-64 and you come to the Snyder, if you turn south on the Snyder, the next exit, I think it's Taylorsville Road, you turn out like you're heading back to Shelby County, and you get down in this little creek, Poplar Creek. This is the Norfolk Southern Railroad, and the story is that the Goat Man lives under this bridge. And he'll come get you, the Goat Man, if you live anywhere in this area. I don't know if people in Trimble County know about Goat Man or not. But all my students at EKU, if they're from Louisville, oh, we know the Goat Man. My mom and dad used to go looking for Goat Man. I've been down there. I know what you're talking about. You can see it's a rusty, dusty old bridge. There's one track that goes across that, and there's nothing there. There's no railing or anything. And the story of the Goat Man, and it's posted. They got fences. They got signs, private property, danger, do not enter, trespassers will be prosecuted, all this stuff. Despite all of that, in April 2016, Raquel Brain was killed when she and her boyfriend climbed out onto the Norfolk Southern Railroad, and a train came along. Well, apparently the boyfriend could hold on, but the young woman was either struck by the train or fell to her death. So the Goat Man has actually claimed victims. They had come to Louisville because they were going to go to the Waverly Hills Sanitarium, which is a well-known ghost haunt. And while they were waiting for evening to come and to do their tour at the Waverly Hills, they were going to go over and check out the Goat Man. And little did they know. Now, of course, it was not the Goat Man that did anything. This was Norfolk Southern, and they were trespassing, and they should have known better than get out on it. You saw what that trestle looked like. This is an artist recreation. Goat Man is supposed to be half man and half goat. Kind of a hairy creature, but horns, and then an animal-like face. And I love this image. This purports to be the Goat Man, but in fact, it's from a movie, like an Exorcist or something. This is a Hollywood version of what a satanic figure looks like. And the person then granulated it and did some stuff like that, and then posted it. Oh, I found the Goat Man. Here's Goat Man. But it's been debunked. This is actually a special effects Hollywood kind of thing. But I love the image. It's so creepy. And it does look like, if you watch it on YouTube, it looks like, oh, wow, I guess that's the Goat Man. Sure looks like it. And it's become a thing of pop culture. This woman, Becky Vickers, is a Texan. And the Goat Man's bridge that she's writing about, she's reset it in Texas and added a lot of extra things to it, pentagrams and all this kind of stuff, and suicides on the bridge and this kind of thing. But again, this is part of pop culture, and the Goat Man. My son, who's a filmmaker, has written a script about Goat Man. He specializes in horror films, and apparently, as he was making inquiries about it, Norfolk Southern is not happy about that. The less publicity about Goat Man, the better. They did not encourage him to go forward with that film, and they did not want him to, get out on that bridge or do anything like that. So the Goat Man may live, but Norfolk Southern is not happy about it. Okay, here's another bridge. This is my second. This is a Bigfoot attack. This is a bridge across the Green River. You can't see much of the river there. We're in Henderson County in western Kentucky, going over the Green River, but we're only about 8 miles from Henderson, which, close to Evansville, Indiana on the Ohio. So if you're leaving Henderson, heading east toward Owensboro, Spotsville is right on the Henderson County, Davis County line. It's in extreme eastern Henderson County, where the Green River comes in. Barton Unley and his family claim in 1975, when he was still living at home, and here's the home itself. Now, my understanding is the home has now been taken down. It's no longer there. This is a contemporary picture. They had a grandparent or two that were living in a mobile home there behind it. And Spotsville is out in the middle of nowhere. I mean, there's not really a community there at all. There's a service station and, some houses and a church, but it's not really much of a community. And this house is outside of, kind of like the Kelly Hopkinsville home. They're really out in the woods. And his story is that these more than one Bigfoot, because they were seen a couple at a time, were being seen in the woods close to the home. They were kind of looking in the windows, coming up on the porch and rattling the doors. And the family was terrorized and went on for weeks. And they would call the state police, and the state police would come out, and they would find nothing, no footprints, no evidence, no one's been hurt. And so they would tell everybody to calm down, and the police went back to normal patrols. Well, a day or two later, a week or two later, they have another incident, and they would see a Bigfoot. They're terrified. This is something big and hairy. It's 7 feet tall, inhuman looking. They call the police, and police would come out, and they'd find nothing. And the state police got really tired of this. And after a while, they would come out, but they would just kind of, sort of look around and, okay, the Nunley outfit, down. So try to get them calmed down back in the house. And at one point, Bart's dad had been out on the property, and there was some kind of shed or barn that was kind of falling down in one of the back parts of the property. And one of these creatures was in there. He could see this creature inside, and they called the state police, and they said, okay, he's right there. He's down here. And so the police came out, and they wouldn't even go look. They, the boy that cried wolf, or the boy that cried Bigfoot, too many times. And so he said, well, what? You're not even going to go look? And they said, okay, you think there's a creature down there? Don't go down there. Kind of like the Mel Brooks joke about the doctor. Guy comes to the doctor and says, doctor, it hurts when I do this. And Mel Brooks says, don't do that. Don't go down there. If there's a monster in the barn, don't go to the barn. Well, Bart Nunley was not impressed, and he thought his family was being disrespected. And he was right. This is the kind of thing, this is an illustration, I think, from the book. If I remember, I think that's where I pulled this. Again, very human, but also very non-human. He's written several books on this. Barton Nunley, Bigfoot in Kentucky, this is several years old. This is one that has sold more, I think, Mysterious Kentucky. And he's got 2 volumes, volume 1, this is volume 2. And I just like this image. I like the picture of the guy in the stream bed. And his newer one, this is like 2018, early 2019, The Inhumanoids by Barton Nunley. So he's taken this interest and has collected these stories, like his family has collected, stories of people that have encountered Bigfoot and or other creatures. This is kind of a lizard man. And like his family, not always being given much respect. Now, my final cryptid is canine cryptids, werewolves or wolfmen. And you may be familiar with Linda Godfrey and her book called The Beast of Bray Road. She lives up in Wisconsin, and she was a reporter for a small daily and was really their artist. I mean, she did art for advertising, but did some reporting. And so people were reporting some kind of creature, and a really big dog, but it stood up on 2 legs and had hands and ran off on 2 feet. And so she thought, well, okay, for sure. So she goes to the Extension Service, Wildlife Conservation Service in Wisconsin, and it's a small community. She knew who this man was. And, said, okay, well, I'm Linda Godfrey. I'm from the Gazette or whatever. And she said, do you have any idea what these people could be seeing? They've been calling the newspaper office. They've seen this big dog. And he said, just a minute. And he goes to his filing cabinet and opens it. It's got a manila folder, and the tag on the manila folder says werewolf. And Linda Godfrey said, okay, at that point, I had a story. If the wildlife conservation officer has a folder slugged werewolf, at that point, it's a story. And he'd had reports of this. And there's this little connector road called Bray Road. There are roads just like it all over Trimble County, all over Kentucky, and everywhere in the Midwest. It's about 2.5, 3 miles long. Field on this side, field on that side, some woods here and there. A very normal, we all drive by roads just like that every day. Bray Road has some kind of creature like that people see picking up roadkill or darting across the road, or kind of it's hunched over and they think, well, it's a Great Dane or something, a big dog. And then this thing stands up holding some kind of prey in, prehensile fingers, puts it under its arm and walks away on 2 legs. Not something normal dogs do. And again, people who reported this, like Bigfoot reports, these are not crazy people. These are normal people doing normal things. They're farmers going to work. Farmers go to work really early in the morning because they've got a lot of work to do. They're out, in the wintertime, it stays dark and they have to go to work in the dark. And so at 5 or 6:30 or 7 in the morning, they're driving along Bray Road, trying to get from here to there. And here's just something along the road. So she has now written a couple of books, one, The Beast of Bray Road and Monsters in America. Linda Godfrey has several stories. My story is The Beast Between the Rivers, down in Land Between the Lakes. And it's a real beautiful area, but it's a relatively new wildlife preserve. The Soil Conservation Service acquired all that land during the 1930s when the dams were built during the, part of the relief programs during the Great Depression. And so people were moved out of there. The government bought their property and it was turned into a wildlife refuge, but it's only been so for, 60 or 70 years. It's not like it's been this way for hundreds of years or thousands of years. So it's relatively new. But I had a high school buddy whose family had property down there that the government bought out in the 30s. And he's told me many times that his grandfather wouldn't let him go out, after dark. Now, grandfather wouldn't talk about it. He never got a good story out of him, but he said they had to stay either in the yard or in the house or on the porch when they were down visiting that property. Of course, that was bought out, years ago, and it's been now torn down. The story has to do with a group from Murray State University, and they're part of a biology field trip, and they're out there doing a wildlife inventory of some kind. They're in the Land Between the Lakes. There's this one road that runs north and south, and a couple of run east and west, but they're somewhere in the middle of nowhere between Lake Barkley and Kentucky Lake. And they're out there counting something. I don't know what they're even doing. And they start seeing eye shine. There's something around their camp, and they're picking up eye shine from their campfire. So they get a flashlight, and when they do the flashlight, that's what they see. Well, needless to say, they jump in the truck, in the car, and they go roaring out of there and say they've seen a werewolf or some kind of 2-legged wolf. And the way the story is told is that Murray State no longer does research in Land Between the Lakes. Now that's completely false because they have all kinds of biology programs. They study those lakes, they study Land Between the Lakes. It's a wonderful resource. And Murray does not cower in its campus from the Wolfman. But if you're telling the story, that's the way the story is told. Like many of these stories, if you try to, what was the professor's name? Who were some of those students? Well, then it all gets real vague. Well, I don't know, Dr. So-and-so, some biology guy. Well, some biology guy, and they're pretty, in 1973, the date there, and it's real specific, it's Murray State, and it's specific, they were, biology majors. But then when you try to nail it down, well, which biology major? Who were those students? How many of them were there? Who was that professor? It all gets, I don't know, you can look it up. No, you can't. I've tried to look it up. It's one of those stories. It's a great story, but it may be just that. It may be a story. However, there are stories having to do with people seeing creatures in the heavy woods in Land Between the Lakes. Okay, now, here's my first nutty professor story. I'm going to talk about the Louisville goatman. And here's my nutty professor theory about the goatman. What creature lives under a bridge, attacks people who try to cross it, and is terrifyingly ugly? What do we know? A troll! You're right. Extra points for you. He's a troll. No doubt about it. The goatman is it's a folklore motif. We have these stories that are so culturally ingrained in us, we don't even realize that we have them in our brains. But English-speaking people have been afraid of bridges since the Romans came to England in the 1st century. They're made out of rock and they're hanging in the air. How can that be? You know, the Romans didn't tell stories about trolls because they understood about bridges. The ancient Britons did not understand about bridges and they were terrified. Folklore people also talk about bridges. And of course, we've had bridges before, you know, where Bigfoot is there at Spottsville, and here at the Goatman, of course. But a bridge is it's called a liminal area. It's a borderland between this place and that place. And border areas where you cross over from one place to another have a lot of spiritual power, supposedly, at least in folklore studies. Liminal areas are things like the entryway from a churchyard into a graveyard, a crossing from a river from one side of the river to the other, crossroads where two roads cross each other are supposed to have spiritual power. So for ancient people, bridges being a border between here and there and a way to get across the border took on a lot of power and narrative power, if nothing else. And people have been telling stories about trolls on the bridge. In fact, you know, Dora the Explorer. I don't know, when you were a kid, did you ever watch Dora the Explorer? Yeah, my kids watched Dora the Explorer. There's a big bad troll. And he doesn't eat people, but they have to answer a riddle to get across the bridge. The three billy goat scruff. You know, who's that trying to cross my bridge? You know, and the three billy goat scruff have to outsmart the troll, which is usually not hard because trolls are not very bright. But it's just something that especially English-speaking humans, like to tell. It's part of something that we just seem to own culturally. I bet everyone here knows the story of the ghostly hitchhiker. Now, you might not recognize the title, but you all know the story because everyone in the English world knows the story. In England, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, big chunks of India, big chunks of Africa, the United States, of course. Now, where the United States is gone, places like the Philippines and Japan, people in those countries, anywhere the Brits or the Americans have been, which is basically everywhere. Someone in Antarctica is now telling the story of the ghostly hitchhiker. Late nights, dark and stormy nights, a man's driving along the road. Here's a young woman in a wedding dress. She waves him down. Oh, mister, I'm late for my wedding. Can you give me a ride to the church down the road? It's 2 a.m. What are you out in the middle of the road on a stormy night? Miss, if you missed your wedding, can I give you a ride into town? No, sir. I know they're waiting for me. It's just down the road. It's only about 2 miles. I just can't get there. Can you give me a ride? So he's going to be a good Samaritan. He opens the door. She's soaking wet. She gets in. He thinks, okay, my upholstery is ruined. He can feel as she climbs in the car. You know, when someone gets in the car, there's kind of weight. You can feel someone's as she settles into the seat. And he's driving along, and it's windy and terrible, and he's really focused on this. When he gets to the church, it's dark, it's 2 or 3 a.m, and he turns to tell her, and she's gone because she was a ghost. She is the ghostly hitchhiker. And there's a light on behind the church, and he knocks on the door, and it's a caretaker who was up because of the storm. He said, oh, you saw Mary Ellen. She's been trying to get to her wedding since 1957, and she was killed in a wreck, and she's trying to get here, but she can never get here. She's destined to never make it to her wedding. You have picked up, once again, the ghostly hitchhiker. Well, Loyal Jones, who's a folklore studies professor at Berea College, has traced that story back to Elizabethan times. And the person who recorded it in 15 whatever said it's an ancient story then. So people in the English world have been telling the ghostly hitchhiker, that was, you know, obviously back then it wasn't a car, it was a carriage, but, you know, somebody picked him up and When they get there, she's not in the carriage anymore. She has gone. So we have these things that are cultural artifacts, and they show up when we've got a creepy bridge. We put a troll under it. Okay, nutty professor theory number 2, Bigfoot sightings. Okay, now because I'm a nutty professor, I get to do some professor stuff. So I have a little vocabulary I want to share with you. Inherited fear. There seem to be some things that we are just afraid of. I have an aunt who's terrified of snakes. Now, I know for a fact that this aunt has never been bitten by a snake in her life. And in fact, as far as I know, no one in the family has ever been bitten by a snake. In fact, since every Smith runs screaming like a 5-year-old when we see a snake, we haven't even been close to snakes. So there is no danger in our outfit of being bitten by a snake. This is a tremendous phobia of my aunt. People are afraid of spiders. Well, spiders will bite you, and there's some that are more toxic than others, but really, very few people actually have, poisonous spider bites. I mean, it can happen, but everybody or many people are really terrified of spiders are icky. Loud noises. If you have a baby and the baby's in the crib and somebody goes, the baby's arms come up like this. They're wired to do that. Protecting the head and the neck. And the baby's arms will, what do and again, if you have a baby and you're kind of like playing with it, it scares the baby if it thinks it's being dropped. We're afraid of darkness and storms. So it's possible that there are things kind of like the cultural stories that are just sort of wired into our brains. So inherited fear. The other one is an archetype. And in historical psychology, going back to Carl Jung, an archetype is one of these things in our brain that we just share culturally. We all have these things that we are familiar with, and it seems to be that everybody on Earth, every human being, understands a circle as a symbol of eternity. Green is the color of life and growth and new spring. Water has to do with eternity, and there's just certain universal symbols that every human interprets in roughly the same way. Well, that's kind of interesting that we all have racial memory of seeing a circle as a symbol of eternity. Green, as everyone sees green things as growing in life and hope, so on and so forth. So archetype. The other one is phenomenology. This is the last one. You don't have to remember a lot of terminology. Phenomenology is something the Germans came up with. And the idea is this. Reality, it's not just nuts and bolts. That's like Rene Descartes and his Cartesian reality. Physical reality. Well, in phenomenology, physical reality is really there, but it's also what's going on in your brain. So there is physical reality, but what's really reality is what you're seeing happen in your brain. Is real in your brain, and hopefully what's going on in your brain corresponds to what's out here. That would be perfect. When it's not, then you're schizophrenic and you have to go see a doctor. But for most of us, these things shake hands. But even in the Bible, St. Paul's on the road to Tarsus, and he has an experience. He sees the risen Christ, and it changes his life. He becomes St. Paul at that point. The people with him, and it's clear in the Acts of the Apostles, they did not have that experience. They didn't even hear everything. They maybe saw light, or what's happening to you? Well, he was completely changed. He had an experience that changed his life, and he went on to change history. But the people with him, standing right next to him, did not have an experience of the risen Christ. They were not involved in that reality. That was an interior reality for him. Okay, so we're talking about phenomenology. We're talking about archetypes, and we're talking about inherited fear. Here's a $1 million fact. Human beings and Neanderthals inhabited the same regions of Europe, the Middle East, North Africa for 60,000 years. Caucasians see Bigfoot. African Americans very, very rarely see Bigfoot. But people who were descended from people in the Middle East, North Africa, and Europe, when they're in the woods alone and something goes knock in the night, they're seeing a big hairy creature. because for 60,000 years, there was a big hairy creature in the woods. And they absolutely needed to be careful about that. They were dangerous. You got to stay away from those things. They'll come and get you. And what I think is going on, and again, I'm not asking you to believe this, I'm just telling you what I think. So you don't have to believe this if you don't want to. I think we are programmed. If you're a Caucasian, you are programmed, it is racial memory, to see a big hairy creature in the woods. And whatever that's really out there, the physical reality, thinking of phenomenology, the interior reality, your brain shows you a movie of Bigfoot. You know, brows hunched over, really hairy, smells terrible, you know, makes grunty noises, doesn't talk like humans. Our ancestors, for millennia, tens of millennia, saw creatures just like that. So when we encounter something in the woods, that memory is triggered, and we have to get the hell out of it. There are stories of people who are former military. They're law enforcement. They're really big, rough, tough, outdoorsy men and women. They've led active lives. They're armed. Many times they're carrying weapons. And they encounter one of these things and they become terrified. They have a panic attack. Well, these are people who've never had a panic attack in their whole lives. They've been in combat. Didn't have a panic attack in a gunfight in Iraq. They're in the woods in their backyard. They see this Bigfoot and suddenly they can't get their breath. You know, they're having this, well, what's going on? Well, they're not really even under attack by this creature. They see the creature and the memory that's triggered is so intense that it triggers the panic attack. Why would somebody who is really a trained warrior be afraid of anything like that? They're armed, big hairy creature. I'll just, nobody pulls the trigger. People are holding a gun. They can't, they say later, I didn't even consider bringing the gun up. It didn't even occur to me. I couldn't think, I just had to run. And then perhaps humans subconsciously expect to encounter large hairy human creatures in the woods, tribal memory. Okay, I know these guys have come to Trumbull County, didn't they, several years ago when their episode they shot here? Okay, well, Matt Moneymaker and Obo, and when they say they've seen it, they're not lying. They have seen, in fact, to their brain, they absolutely, completely, totally did see Bigfoot. And they would swear to it, and they are telling the truth. But ultimately, Renee is correct. We need to be skeptical about whether they're actually physically, there's actually an actual creature out there. Did they experience it? Cliff Barrickman and Matt Moneymaker, I know, I saw it, I know. And they are absolutely right. They did see it, that was going on. Did they see a physical creature? That's another story. I think it was a tribal memory. And that Renee is correct. We need to be really careful about that. And we need to see a body before we really, show me the body. Habeas corpus. I need to see the body. And there's the big man himself there in the back, appropriately misty. Okay, here's my last Fennedy professor theory. I want to talk about UFOs. Now, here's some $1 million fact about that. And I've read pretty much everything I can find for the past 20 years on UFOs. Here's the fact. About 90% of really good, serious UFO incidents, I mean, ones with radar contacts, artifacts, photos, multiple witnesses, occur on or immediately near to military operations area of the United States and the United Kingdom. Let me run that by you again. 90% of good, solid UFO, multiple witnesses, contacts, physical reaction. It's always either immediately on or immediately next to a military operations area of the United States and the United Kingdom. Now, even the Tic Tac incident from 2004, I should say. You've probably seen these videos on TV. They're talking about it. These Navy flyers were in a military operations area off the coast of San Diego, and another UFO incident was reported off the coast of South Carolina. Both of them are military operations area of the US Navy. They were flying in a military operations area. This is where Uncle Sam goes when he wants to be alone. And that's what a coincidence that's where they saw whatever this Tic Tac was flying at speeds that no one had ever seen fly before. Kenneth Arnold in 1947 was off his assigned route. He shouldn't have been over there. He flew over there because he was looking for the downed aircraft. That's why he was seen. He shouldn't have been over there. Those craft were flying. Jet aircraft were new. No one had ever seen a jet aircraft in 1947. They had captured it from the Nazis who were flying jet aircraft. So suddenly the Americans and British were flying things that no one had ever seen before. So I think UFOs probably have US Air Force and Royal Air Force written on their sides. The Wunderwaffen. What was Hitler talking about that would be a world-dominating event that could win the war even in May of 1945? And now this is a myth. You don't need to believe this, but this is part of the UFO mythology. Part of the UFO mythology is that what the Nazis were working on at one of these labs in the Alps that the Allies did liberate at the end of the war, but there are a bunch of scientists the Germans had machine gunned. They burned all the notes, and some of these hangars were now empty. Well, they're really weird saucer-shaped hangars. What were the Germans building in these big hangars with these big things that look like saucer-shaped? One of them's called the hinge, like Stonehenge. It's big round made out of cement and has anchors on it where something could be, it's in extreme southern Germany and puts now part of Poland. The mythology is the Germans were working on field repulsion technology, something to do with magnetism, or if you really want to go out into the wild blue yonder, anti-gravity kinds of work. This would make a craft. It wouldn't be a jet, it wouldn't be a rocket, some other kind of propulsion that is field propulsion. The Allies got their hands on it in 1945. They start working on it. That's why things are crashing at Roswell or whatnot. It's an experimental craft. They don't know how to control it. And it's taken them years to perfect it. But now it has been perfected. It's world dominating technology. It's above top secret. It's the kind of technology, not just a bigger bomb or a bigger rocket. It's Manhattan Project, kind of big. Someone who controls field propulsion technology controls the planet. I mean, it's revolutionary. And part of the mythology of the X-Files, if you are like me, a big fan of Scully and Mulder, the backstory of that is that there is a breakaway civilization, a group of humans who very well may have been in contact with aliens. I mean, that's part of the premise of the show. But these humans, not aliens, are bad guys. Aliens are not the bad guys in the X-Files. Humans are the bad guys. They've got their hands on this technology. They don't want anybody else to get it. And all the people that get hurt and all the plots and subplots and subplots in the X-Files have to do with keeping that secret a secret. Men in Black, trying to keep anybody from finding out that we in fact do have revolutionary technology, things that would completely change the world. And one last little bit of trivia. One of the stories is that during the first Gulf War in 1990, the Americans and the British had overrun part of Iraq, or the part, I guess, of Kuwait that Iraq had occupied. And it took like 20 hours. I mean, it was just a lightning fast offensive, completely overwhelmed Saddam Hussein's troops that had occupied that country. And Russian observers were watching Allied craft, and the Soviet Union collapses a year or two later. Having seen what the Allies could in fact deploy in a battlefield scenario, excuse me, they go back to Moscow and say, okay, boys, it's all up. We're done. We can't deal with that. And why else would the Soviet Union absolutely just collapse? The Berlin Wall comes down, it's just all, what's going on with that? Okay, that's my presentation. 3 cryptids, 3 UFO stories, and 3 nutty professor tales. If anyone wants to provide any questions, I'll try to answer them if I can. Otherwise, I want to thank the Kentucky Humanities Council for having me here. I want to thank Trimble County Library for having me here. I've really enjoyed my trip. I hope you enjoyed my talk, and let me know if you have any questions.
I have one question.
Excuse me, yes.
The MPs showing where the family was at the farmhouse and they were shooting. Why were the MPs there?
Well, there are several problems, not several problems, there's several incidents like the Kelly Hopkinsville incident where something crashes and the Army just happens to be there. The Kecksburg incident in Pennsylvania is one of them. The Flatwoods Monster in West Virginia is another one. The Army just suddenly is there. Well, why are they there? And the story is, or now this according to the mythology, again, I'm not asking you to believe this is part of the UFO subculture. If this is a secret that Uncle Sam is trying to keep, then what they want to do is be sure they're on top of everything and they're really watching when things are going on. And especially in Flatwoods in West Virginia and the Kelly Hopkinsville incident, there are declassified documents from the Freedom of Information Act that in the 1950s and early 1960s, but particularly in the 1950s, Uncle Sam, the CIA and the FBI and the Army, they were really worried about a scenario like happened when Orson Welles did the War of the Worlds broadcast in 1938. He did a presentation about War of the Worlds, about the Martians invading, and everybody heard it on the radio and they panicked and they go out and start shooting at water towers. So they were afraid that the Russians would generate a UFO incident and jam the phone lines and everybody would panic. And in the panic, they would launch a real attack against the United States of the United Kingdom using the fake UFO to panic everybody and then take advantage of that for military purposes. So the Flatwoods Monster is really weird and really odd, and they're military people that seem to just show up. And then the Kelly Hopkinsville incident is really weird, and MPs tend to be there and people reporting on it, that why are they there, what's going on with them. And so one theory about this is, if you're a true believer, is that it's something that Uncle Sam staged in a rural area. Will people panic if there's some kind of report of aliens, running around loose? And both of those occurred in the 50s when these memos had now been declassified through the Freedom of Information Act were being circulated. And the report was that the people who are there at Flatwoods in West Virginia and Kelly, Kentucky, they were terrified. And these people spent the rest of their lives dealing with some kind of a problem, being ridiculed by their peers and their friends and their neighbors. But it may have been part of an experiment that the Army was running to see would Americans really freak out. And again, the X-Files, one of the premises of the X-Files is that a lot of the alien abductions are actually being done by Uncle Sam because they want to check for contamination, are we being exposed to radiation, or what's going on, and being blamed on aliens. But it's actually people in uniform with a gray rubber mask who are actually doing it. Now, again, that's a fictional construct. Chris Carter and the X-Files, a fictional scenario, but it is shaking hands with the underlying mythology of a lot of UFO believers. So that's a long-winded answer to a simple question, but that's why the MPs are kind of interesting at Kelly, because, well, what were they doing there? Unless Uncle Sam was really interested in what would happen if Americans saw an alien.
So at the farmhouse where there were the Bigfoot sightings, after the one where there was the sighting in the barn, were there more, or did the police come out more after that, or was it just like that one and then they just kind of stopped?
Well, Barton Unley, who's a highly articulate man, and like I said, he's written several of these books. As I recall, his family ended up moving. They couldn't stand that, and the house was ultimately taken down or burned down or something. The police always came when they were called. It's like they didn't refuse to respond, but when they got there, they didn't feel like they had to spend several hours trooping around through the woods. They made sure the place was secure, no one was hurt, no one had guns out, they weren't going to shoot a Bigfoot themselves. And once the area was secure, the police reported that their job was done. They didn't have to babysit these people. They believed that Barton Unley's family were Looney Tunes and more or less told them that. So every time that they reported a Bigfoot, my understanding is the police came it's not, they never refused to come, but the state police, the sheriff's deputies, and the people who had jurisdiction out there, they kind of had a red mark around that particular community and that family. There's a story about one of my students at EKU was from somewhere along in here. It's going up like you're going towards Cincinnati, I think not Trumbull County, but on up toward Muhlenberg in that area. And traffic along I-71 one night was brought to a complete stop. And people were stopping, they're out of their cars, and there's this gigantic UFO, and people are looking at this UFO. And the sheriff's office gets a call, and they said, oh, there's a UFO up there on I-71. And so the sheriff has taken all this down and said, okay, well, where is it? Well, it's by milepost. So, and the sheriff goes, well, wait, hold the phone. What milepost? That's right near the, so-and-so farm. I know that outfit. We'll get back with you. Get those people on the way. I'm on my way. So he goes out to this farm, and here are these good old boys, and they've got a Kroger grocery bag, and they've got a little tin ashtray from McDonald's. And they put a birthday candle on the tin ashtray and it taped it to the grocery bag, lit the candle and had some string to it. And they were flying these, basically a Chinese lantern, up over their farm was up on this hill. So they had 2 or 3 of these things, and they're flying them around, and doing this. And it was basically a balloon, a hot air balloon, but in a little tiny scale, just a Kroger bag. And people on I-71, they're seeing these lights in the sky, and they're different colors, and they're freaking out. And it's these good old boys up on the hill. Now they were drinking. There was beer being consumed that night. So the sheriff told him to reel it in, stop, you've got to get traffic going on here. Don't do that again. And sort of read him the riot act, but the sheriff knew that family. I don't know what they're doing, but I know who they're up to something out there. I'll go deal with them. You just get the traffic going. So when you're trying to do research into this, there's all of this. And sometimes they weren't trying to stop traffic, although they could certainly see it from the farm. They're just playing around. There's some students at Berea that they staged a Bigfoot sighting. They're down, south of Berea. They have all this land, these big mounted Indian Fort Theater, and they were down there on their hiking trails at Indian Fort you can hike on. And these Berea College students, they got a video camera. They just happen to have a video camera. It's trained on this clearing. They just happen to be filming this empty clearing. And here comes the Bigfoot who comes dancing out and, does some Bigfoot stuff and then walks out of frame on the other side. And the guys in the background are going, oh, wow, it's Bigfoot. What are we going to do? And it was so obviously fake, and they're giggling and, carrying on. If you really did see Bigfoot, you would completely freak out. You'd see something a lot saltier than, oh my, it's Bigfoot. So, these are college students. They're having fun. It's an afternoon, and they weren't really trying to hoax anybody. They're just doing something. But there are thousands of those. So it's really hard to separate something that is a real, interesting, seriously weird case from something that are some undergraduates who may have had a beer or two and have a gorilla costume, from the drama department, and are out, filming Bigfoot at Indian Fort Theater. So it's hard to make that call sometimes, because some of the hoaxes are really good. That the hoax that I had up there, the devil thing, that was a Hollywood special effects. So the original costume probably cost thousands of dollars for some exorcist movie or other. And then the guy that did the hoax had to take that image, do a clip, and then he massaged it to make it look real grainy and make it look like it was, a trail cam from this area by the Pope Lake Bridge. So sometimes a lot of work goes into these hoaxes. Well, if you've got a really well thought through hoax, it's sometimes honestly hard to tell the difference between the well thought through hoax and something, because if I'm out there and I'm seeing Bigfoot or UFO, I'd be like Don Knotts. You don't know who Don Knotts is, but he was a guy who specialized in being scared. Well, he made a living being terrified. He'd be shaking like this. Well, that would be me trying to film Bigfoot. I'd be so terrified I wouldn't be able to hold the camera. So sometimes if you have someone and they've got a really firm camera, that's suspicious right there. That they've kind of prepared it. They've been, it's on a tripod. They had to be looking in this one area. Well, what a coincidence. And there he is, the big man himself, walking in his hairy self right into frame. And all that kind of stuff. Well, the ones that are more interesting are probably the ones that are actually the less professional looking and have a little spontaneous kind of component to them. Okay, those are great questions. Any questions or comments? Okay, well, again, thank you very much. Thank you, Trimble County. Thank you, Kentucky Humanities Council. I really enjoyed being with you.